Please help me welcome to the stage, Mike Davis.
So I've been working in community colleges for more than 20 years. There are more than 1,000 of them across the country. There are wonderful access points to higher education, and I'm willing to bet that quite a few people here have community college credit. When I started, I was a chemistry professor at Harold Washington College in the middle of downtown Chicago. I was fresh out of grad school. I was full of big ideas, full of energy. I was going to make my students into amazing researchers. Why else would you take a chemistry class? Not because you had to. I was ready to bring capital C chemistry to community college, and that meant things like the periodic table, stoichiometry, thermodynamics, and all the other topics that helped everyone here pick their non-chemistry careers. Now, I learned a few things in that first semester. Early on, I learned that my students were not interested in becoming amazing researchers. I learned that it was a very diverse place. If I had 36 students in a classroom, I would have 18 languages represented. And I also learned that a lot of my students already had degrees. And when I asked them, what are you doing here in college? They'd say, we're here to take chemistry as a prerequisite for nursing school. We want to be nurses. And so I thought, oh, okay. Because chemistry is a class that is really a gatekeeper, it's a barrier. It can talk a lot of people out of the career they want to go into, and I didn't want that to be the outcome for my students, so I decided to change things. We're going to learn how to be good humans with chemistry. We're going to focus on things like critical thinking. I would bring working nurses into our class as guest speakers so my students could ask them honest and frank questions like, how much chemistry do I really need to know? And I even had the rare pleasure of teaching someone who I went to high school with, a high school graduate that I graduated with, Jamie. She ended up being a student in my class. And for 9 or 10 years, this worked out pretty great. I had good outcomes with my students, a solid rating on Rate My Professor. And I had this vague notion that I was putting nurses out into the world. I liked my job. And while my students were making progress in their life, I was making progress in mine. Around the time I got tenure as a professor, I also got tenure as a boyfriend, so I got promoted to husband. And in December of 2010, we were expecting our first baby. Now, my wife and I, we were prepared. We were as prepared as any two people who have never done this before can be. And we had been to some classes, we had read some books, we had seen some videos, and we had a plan. The plan was this was going to go smoothly. We wouldn't even need painkillers. So when the time came, and we got over to the hospital, got processed and into our room, it became immediately obvious that we would need painkillers. And we like the new plan now. Some time goes on and it's time for pushing to begin, and so painkillers have to be stopped. And I can see that my wife is in a lot of discomfort. She's very uncomfortable. She's got some monitors hooked up to her, and I'm looking at the output of the monitors, and I don't understand what's going on. And I'm getting really uncomfortable, and I'm not really sure what to do here. We're in the room by ourselves until a nurse pops in, and I immediately recognize her as Jamie, the girl I went to high school with, the girl I had as a student in my class. And I smiled at her. She saw behind my smile that I didn't know what was going on, and I was nervous and anxious. So she came over to the monitors, and she calmly explained what's going on. And she said, don't worry, everything's going great. So a few more hours go by, and we're doing all we can, but it's not productive. And the doctors tell us that we're going to need a C-section, and that wasn't in the plan. So we prep for surgery. My wife gets brought into the surgery room. I go and I sit down next to her. And one of the other things they told us is that they saw signs of meconium. And if you don't know what that is, that's when a baby stools in the womb and it's in the way, and we should expect problems. So now I'm going in with problems. Okay. So they get to work pretty quickly. They extract our baby, our son, Giovanni, and he doesn't cry. I was expecting a cry. In the movies, there's a cry. When the nurses say, come over, Dad, come take a look at your son, I do. And he's discolored. He has a breathing tube down his throat. And his soft head looks all compressed from hours of unproductive pushing. But mostly what I saw was that he was in trouble, real trouble. And they were getting ready to take him into intensive care, so I went back down and sat next to my wife's head, and I just lost it. My wife is recovering from an unplanned surgery. My son is in real danger, and I don't know what to do. In my first few moments as a father, I am utterly powerless. And I just sit down next to her and I cry and I wail because I can't do anything else, but I can do that. And the doctor sees that I'm having a rough time, and he leans over and he hands me some gauze to cry into, and he says, "You know, several of the nurses here have recognized you as their chemistry professor. You should be proud. They're good nurses." So my wife gets into recovery, my son's in the NICU, I go into the NICU to see him, and I look up and I see another one of my students. And she's helping some parents with their baby in an incubator. I see another one of my students showing parents how to log their baby's feeding. I leave the NICU and I see another one of my students helping a mother and a child back into their room. All in all, I find 6 of my former students while we're there on that floor. Now, my son and I, my wife and I spent a lot of time in the NICU with our son. And he went in there at 6.5 pounds. And a lot of things could have happened, but what did happen is he made a good turn. He was gonna be okay. He was breathing on his own relatively soon. And there were a lot of other parents in there that were looking for reassurance, and they were being served by amazing humans with chemistry, practicing capital C compassion as they did it. And I could not have been more proud. So it started with Jamie explaining to me what's going on with those monitors. It continued with my students doing the absolute best they could. They were being wonderful. And 10 years prior, I started teaching a chemistry class, which is a known barrier to completing a degree. And here are my students helping me pass my first barrier as a parent, helping so many people at their most powerless, countless parents. And because that happened, I know confidently that I don't just like my job, I love being at a community college. Thank you.